Think Realty Nation, it's your host, Abhi. Welcome to the show. Excited to be here today. Excited to talk about content and a lot more for you apartment complex investors out there. We've got two segments. The meat of this show is going to be with my good friend Josh Culler. And then a couple takeaways that you need to know from the National Apartment Association's latest income and expense data, especially if you are an apartment complex investor. I was looking, just like a little kind of segue into that for a second, I was looking at some of these numbers. They're very, very interesting, and the data is quite compelling. So you want to stick around and make sure that you pay attention to this. All right, the main event. His name is Josh Culler, but before we get to him, this podcast is brought to you by Norada Real Estate Investments, your premier source for cash flow investment property. Check them out, and please tell Marco Santarelli I said hi by visiting www.turnkeyrealestateinvestments.com. Again, that's www.turnkeyrealestateinvestments.com. All right, so from time to time, there are a couple of people that I enjoy having on the show, and especially those that understand real estate investing. And as a real estate investor, as a real estate wholesaler, as a property manager, as an apartment complex syndicator, what you have to recognize is, one, you're in the business of generating what? Leads. And then, in order to get those leads, you can either go knock on 1,000 doors and make 1,000 phone calls a day. Probably not realistic. Let's face it, probably have a VA doing that for you. But ultimately, you need to create content and deliver that content in a fashion that helps the person that's viewing it see you as an authority in the space that you want to develop that influence in. Josh understands exactly how to create content, deliver content, and being a young entrepreneur, the mindset that it takes to grow a business. So let's get on with it. Let's talk to him. Josh, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Abhi. Miss seeing you at all the Think Realty events. I went to the last one in Atlanta and hung out with you a little bit, so that was fun. But
yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, the Think Realty events are always a blast. I mean, it's like a really big family, and it's really, really cool to see everybody and give everybody hugs and things like that. And I think one of the days I wasn't there because I was out, and they were just taking pictures of the big version of me on a poster board, which I thought was kind of, it's always fun.
The jumbo-sized Abhi.
The jumbo-sized Abhi, right. That's the jumbo-sized Abhi. This is the fun-sized Abhi. Those are two big differences of Abhi. All right, so give us, enough about me. Give us a little breakdown of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so Josh Culler with Culler Media. I have actually been in the real estate investing industry for about 6 years, going on 6 years. I pulled out about in March, so several months ago of this year to go full-time into doing this. I've been in and out of a couple of different companies that are in the Northwest Indiana region. One company I was a part of was three partners that have actually been on the show here, I know, and really grew in that. So I got started when I was 19 years old and started doing like everything in real estate. So I had no clue what it was. It was just another job to me, doing wholesaling, acquisition side, dispositions, closings, pre-looks, putting out bandit signs, Craigslist postings, you name it, all of it. And so that really gave me the grounds for understanding real estate investing as a whole. I've actually fixed and flipped one property myself. Will never do it ever again. And I've wholesaled on my own. And now I
probably wouldn't either, right? It's such a headache. I
hate it, man.
Right. Let me just buy stuff and just hold on to it. That's all I want to do now.
And even better now that I'm just lending money. So I'm just taking money and creating more money out of it. So that's a lot of fun. But
so you're this young guy, you're this young entrepreneur. You did a lot of self-development, and now you're inspiring other young entrepreneurs. You've got a mastermind that you hold every year, and you also lend money. So help me, take me through that. That seems like a lot to accomplish at such a young age, and you're like 17 years old still. So how do you do all of that? Are you the kind of guy that wakes up at 4 a.m. and you're like, okay, I'm going to work out for 2 hours. I'm going to go run a marathon. I'm going to meditate, and then I'm going to levitate, because that's what happens after you meditate for an hour and a half. You just end up levitating. And then you start your day with 2 phone calls, and you make $1 million. How did Josh become Josh?
Man, I tell you, so when I first jumped into it, at 19 years old, again, it was just a job to me. I didn't have any desire to do any kind of investing. I didn't have a desire to self-develop myself. I was still going out partying on, 19, 20, 21 years old. I was single at the time. And so just hanging out, like not even trying to develop myself in any way, shape, or form. Then around 21 to, I would say between 21, 22 years old, it really hit me because I went to my first mastermind called Collective Genius, and man, I just got lit up. Like I had no clue that anything that was going on was like possible. Just these guys are living lives that they absolutely love, and they're not even working full time in their business, that kind of thing. And so that really opened my mind to all of this and the power that real estate investing can bring to even an individual like myself that doesn't even own a real estate investing company. And so that's when I just took off. I just started developing myself, reading books all the time, listening to podcasts. I was a terrible student in school, got D's and F's all the way through high school. And then and Abhi knows me well. I mean, like my learning style is a lot different than most people. Is just, and then building my network was it has by far been the biggest contributor to my education and my growth. I fully believe that you are the person that you hang out with, and not just the 5 people, but everyone that you hang out with. So that really developed me and got me launched. And just being under the wing of Tom Olson. He's been on the show multiple times, and I was working under his wing for about 3-4 years and growing under that, and that's just kind of where I've been. So
Yeah.
yeah.
From a personal development perspective, I mean, and I've seen you grow as an entrepreneur. You now run your
Yeah.
own business. What are some fundamental beliefs that you had to shed throughout the process? Like, because it's tough. And this applies if you're an entrepreneur, and it also applies if you're a real estate investor, whether you're a new investor or a pro investor, right? Like, I feel like our learning styles are very similar. Right? I'm
Yeah.
just going to run into a brick wall until it hurts. Then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This is probably not like what I should do. So how did let's start with the limiting belief kind of question. What are some limiting beliefs that you had to overcome to become the successful entrepreneur you are today?
The number one thing, like there's not even a question. The number one thing that I would tell you, the difference between an average person, the 99.9% of the world, and the 1% of people, not just in real estate investing. I've been involved in real estate investing, like this industry, the most. So I've been able to meet a whole lot of incredible influencers, and I have a lot of clients that are actually really big names in the industry that are influencers. And the number one thing, and that's one of the ways that I learn is by just observation. Like I'm one of those weird people that I go to a store or a shopping mall or whatever, and I'll just watch people, not in a weird way. I just like see what they do and just pay attention. The number one thing that I've observed that people that are successful do, as opposed to the other 99.9% of the world, is problem solve. Like there's no question about it. Like it's like you said, you run into a brick wall. Most people will just get hurt, and then they just like flop and not even try to go anywhere else. Like they'll just hit the brick wall and they're done. Problem solvers, people that are successful, go around the wall. They dig under the wall. They try to climb over the wall. They try to bust through it again. Like they're problem solvers no matter what comes up. And most people, even like yourself, Abhi, and myself, like I've failed 1,000 times more than I
For
have
sure.
actually succeeded. But it's the overcoming of those failures and problem solving those to move forward and keep the needle moving that has made the biggest difference. So there's no
I
question. It's
like
problem
that.
solving.
Yeah, I like that. Solving problems. What are your top like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 favorite books of all time that have really shaped you as an entrepreneur? I mean, you've been around the real estate industry for quite a while, around a lot of big names, around really, really smart people, and we run in the same circles there too. So I'm
Yeah.
really blessed to be around not only you but also other really, really smart people that help to influence the way that I think and grow. What are some books that you would recommend? Like you're a young entrepreneur, somebody like you, somebody a little younger than you, they're looking at you, they're like, wow, this guy like has it together. He has his stuff together. I want to be like Josh. What are some books that you recommend?
Number one is The Richest Man Who Ever Lived. Not The Richest Man in Babylon. I do recommend that one because it's a great finance book for young people. But The Richest Man Who Ever Lived by Stephen Scott. If you're a born again Christian, if you're a believer, it basically talks about the book of Proverbs and about Solomon, who in today's money would be worth trillions and trillions of dollars. Richest Man Who Ever Lived is
Yeah.
the name of the book. but it gives the principles of how he became that person. So number one, no question, I recommend that.
Yeah.
Number two would be The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. That really got me. That was one of the first books that I read when I was trying to develop myself. And it's a short little book, but it is powerful. I can't even tell you how much that helped me. And then the third one would be, and this has changed, every once in a while I'll come around a book and I'm just like, man, that was life-changing. And there's not a whole lot of books that are like that. But I actually had this conversation with you, Abhi, a couple of weeks ago. And the book's called Fearvana. And so it talks about how fear is not something that we should, try to eliminate. So people talk about being fearless. They say, get rid of fear, that kind of thing. This book talks about how fear is actually a friend of yours. And it goes back to what I was talking about with problem solving, where most people fear something and they won't overcome that. And that's why people have that notion of like, get rid of fear, when really fear is the flags that are being thrown up and saying, hey, you need to watch out for that. Watch out for this. If you're going to quit your job, you got to make sure that you have, an income established or reserves or something like that. Like those are the fears of like, if I quit my job, go full time as an entrepreneur, then, I may not have an income. I may not be able to make ends meet, that kind of thing. Those are fears. But this book, Fearvana, talks about overcoming those fears and having courage, which courage is the overcoming of fear. So it's not something, fear is the most powerful impulse to the spirit when it comes down to it. And, if you want to fight longer and push harder, have fear, but it's the overcoming of that fear so that you avoid those things that you fear. So those are the 3 books.
I like it. I was actually quite surprised that you didn't include the first 25 in your top 3, quite frankly. Like I listen to the Think Realty podcast every night before I go to bed because I want to hear what greatness sounds like as soon as I go to bed. And so if I had a book, it would be in the top 3, Josh. Anyway, you should check out his book.
I would include that one just because you forwarded it. So
there you go. You can certainly purchase this book on Amazon called The First 25. And if you're a young person, again, it's a really, really good read, especially if you're just starting out and you want to kind of get in touch with that inner entrepreneurial soul that you have, and you really want to foster that and make that blossom. Josh, let's kind of get to this content creation and delivery piece. You understand what content means for real estate investors and how to generate leads. The 2 things, we have like 3 or 4 minutes before we have to end the show, or before we have to move on to the second part here. 2 things, content creation and content delivery. Real estate investors need to become content creators. How do they do that?
By solving problems. That's basically what it is. And so I do monthly content production for a lot of influencers and keep, steady flow content out there. That's easy to kind of like, if you're an influencer, you're just educating people, right? So that's delivering value. But the question I always get is those who are active investors, and maybe you're a wholesaler, maybe you're a fix and flipper. The thing, so I was actually just with a client yesterday in South Carolina, and basically what we did is we established, and I have a list of like 20, 25 topics to go through for active investors that are marketing to distressed sellers per se. And basically what you're doing, you're hitting those pain points. So we specifically talked about if you've gone through a divorce and you ended up with a property, but you don't want it anymore, or you inherited a property and what you could do with that. Or if you have a foundation problem, hey, and one of the scripts is like, if you have a foundation problem, you may not be able to do anything with it. You're not going to be able to sell it retail because you're going to have to fix it up really, really, like you're going to spend a lot of time and money on it. But I can buy your house. I can do X, Y, Z with that house. So establishing those pain points and specifically targeting those are extremely powerful, especially when it comes to SEO, putting that stuff on your website, and showing, basically case studies of what you can do. That's the kind of content you want to hit. And it's not just videos, it's blogs. It could be, podcasts, jumping on other people's podcasts or whatever. It could be graphics. It could be testimonials. So creating content that hits pain points is the most powerful content that you can do, because that's going to create results.
So where do you suggest I start? Right? Like, let's say I'm somebody that's new to this space, but I want people to hear my voice. Should it be like this crazy, highly produced video podcast with 4 TV screens and 2 different cameras and 18 different lights to make me look pretty and hide my zits? Or should I maybe do a podcast, just an audio podcast? Should I start blogging? Should I start uploading to YouTube? I can sit here and pull out my iPad or my phone and just start recording information. But how do I know what I'm recording is what would be useful to a viewer? Because creating content can also seem a little daunting. What are your tips?
It's 100%. Like if you don't do it the right way, it can be very daunting. So so 4 quick things, because I know we got to wrap the show up.
Sure.
Number 1 is figure out who your audience is. That's number 1. So who is your audience? Now you got to figure out where they're at. So your audience may or may not be on Facebook, like depending on the target audience. And for investors, I mean, most of the time your audience is going to be on Facebook. Figuring out if they're on Instagram, if they're gonna go to YouTube and look stuff up, or if they're gonna go on your website to read blogs or whatever, or articles that are gonna bring them value. So figure out who your audience is, figure out where they're at, and then next is to establish what you're comfortable with doing. So not everybody's comfortable being on video. So either A, you don't do video, do written content, or do podcasts or whatever, or have somebody else do it for you. But you got to figure that out, because the last thing you want to do is start putting video out on a consistent basis because you know that you have to do video, but you hate being on video. Right. So what happens is that you'll do it for a week and you're so gung-ho about it. You get all the equipment. I've seen this multiple times, right? This isn't just
it happened to me, right? Like I go to Craigslist and I buy like this Sony. No, it's not a Sony. It's just some Canon 5D something, and I spend like $800 on it, and I use it twice.
Yeah, and but you like being on video. Some people they don't, and so when they get into this, they'll get 7, 8 videos down the road, and they're like, I hate this. Then they just stop. Then they say content marketing doesn't work. Then they're dead in the water, and and it's hard to change that mindset back. So figure out what you are good at, utilize that, and then you move forward from there. So if you enjoy writing, start with that. If you enjoy just talking and being on podcasts or whatever, start with that. Then move forward to the next step. So those are the things. And to answer your question, doesn't it have to be produced? Everybody's got to start at zero. If you look at Gary Vaynerchuk's first video that he ever put out, it is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. He has a graphic that comes in with words and it literally covers his entire face.
That's right.
So you got to start somewhere. And, starting on your own is definitely the place that you want to go. We have smartphones now that have absolutely incredible cameras. I even use a lot of, when I'm doing footage for some videos that are being produced, I actually use my phone sometimes with a gimbal to get B-roll. So there, do it. Just do that and start it. And a little quick tip, if you're doing video, vertical video is dominating right now. So don't turn your phone and record. Keep it this way because you want to use up as much of the phone screen as possible.
That's right. We're in the real estate space, so we want all that real estate attention. I like it. One last question for you. When it comes to delivering content, right? Like, let's say I pick my vertical, and let's say I'm a big blogger, and I like writing. And I can crank out, say, 1,500 words every week. I'm going to post to my blog. What should I do as a result of that? How do I let people know that the blog is up? Do I put it on LinkedIn? Do I just leave it there and somehow Google and the artificial intelligence behind Google will say, oh, hey, this is such an amazing blog, and we're going to throw it to position number 1 on Google? What do I do? When I've created content, what do I do next?
So, I mean, the first thing would be if you do that, then, you can throw a whole lot of money at it and pay to be up there, right? But nobody that's getting started is going to do that. You can't afford to throw, $3,000 a month at a blog article to get it ranked number 1 for your website. So the one thing that I would tell you is to create micro content around that and then push people to that pillar content. So what I mean is basically, so if you are on an hour-long show, if I'm on this show here, this is pillar content. So it's a half-hour show. If I want people to go to this, then I'll take little snippets out of this show, whether it's short 60-second videos or it's quote graphics, infographics. It could be, another short podcast. It could be literally what I'm answering right here. That's going to be a 3-minute answer. It could be that taken out and put into a podcast format. So you take little pieces of content out of that, and then you basically push people to go hey, you say, if you want to hear the rest of the show, go here, and you link it to the YouTube or the YouTube video or wherever this show goes out. And you push people back to that. I mean, there's a couple of people that I'm working with to specifically build YouTube audiences, and all the content that's going out everywhere is to push people to that YouTube channel. And it is getting, at least both of my clients actually are getting really big traction, but the one is he is just crushing it right now on YouTube. And it's because we're taking all this micro content from his YouTube channel and saying, hey, go back up here, subscribe to the channel, and then people can consume the micro content as they go along as well. So that would be the place to start.
Winner. We talked about creating content. We talked about delivering content. We talked about if you're a new entrepreneur, some of the initial kind of hurdles that you have and what resources are available for you. The top 3 books that Josh recommends. I also recommend his book called The First 25. You can purchase it on Amazon if you want to get in touch with Josh and have questions about creating content and then, of course, delivering that content. You want to go to www.colormedia.com. Again, colormedia.com is your resource. Make sure that you hit him up and let him know that Abhi said hi. And then send him a picture of me because I want him to constantly be looking at a picture of me all the time. Okay, that's really it. Josh, thanks so much, man. I certainly appreciate your time today. A lot of good insights.
Man, it was awesome. I appreciate it, guys.
You got it. This next segment is brought to you by Real Property Management, which is the largest residential property management franchise in North America, managing tens of thousands of properties for individuals, investors, and institutions throughout the country. Learn more by visiting www.realpropertymgt.com, or you can call 888-806-7088. So there are 5 takeaways, and I think this is on nreionline.com. There are 5 takeaways from the National Apartment Association's latest income and expenses data for apartment buildings. So if you are an apartment complex investor, this is information that you need to be paying attention to. This is for 2019. It reveals rising NOIs as well as rising operating expenses. And I was just talking to a really good friend of mine who only invests in apartment complexes. And he says, geez, there are 2 major things that I have to pay for every single month. And that is the salaries and personnel to operate the actual apartment complex and taxes. And sure enough, if you look at the operating expenses per unit, look at that. The orange represents the taxes and the increase right here, and the blue over here represents the increase in the actual salaries and personnel expenses. And I'm like, well, that's exactly what's happening. So there are 5 things that you need to know if you're an apartment complex investor. Number 1, the NOI at the communities that were surveyed has increased by 5.1%. Number 2, the total revenue went up by 6.8% during the year, which is the largest increase in revenue coming from the higher parking fees. Again, this is all from REI Online. I wanted to make sure that I give them a huge shout out. Number 3, the average turnover rate for apartments rose 51% from 48% in 2007. Number 4, operating expenses rose 9.8%, and this is the highest level that's recorded during this market cycle. So that's kind of interesting, right? Like, yes, you want to increase your income, but you want to also increase your expenses relatively speaking. There are a couple ways that you can make money. You can increase your revenue, you can increase your expenses, or you can decrease your expenses. I'll let you think about that. I did say increase expenses. You want to know why, or do you feel you know why? Get in touch with me. You can find me anywhere online at Abhi Gohar, or just drop me a line at thinkrealty.com. Number 5, CapEx. Expenses related to renovation and redevelopment of units declined to below 10%. So kind of interesting. And if you're an apartment complex investor, this is some pretty important data for you to know and just meditate on. Think Realty Nation, that's the show. This podcast wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. And today's sponsor is Narada Real Estate Investments. Check them out, www.turnkeyrealestateinvestments.com. And Narada Real Estate Investments is your premier source for cash flow investment property. Again, you can visit them at www.turnkeyrealestateinvestments.com. Think Realty Nation, that's a wrap. Until next time, happy investing.